This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Well, today we spend the show in Colombia. We begin the program right there in Colombia, where an historic vote took place on Sunday. Gustavo Petro was elected Colombia's first leftist president. His running mate, the Afro-Colombian environmentalist Francia Márquez Mina, also made history by being elected Colombia's first black vice president. Thousands of their supporters took to the streets in celebration in the capital, Bogotá, and across Colombia.
For 200 years, we have been governed by the same people, but today begins to transition to a government of change that will benefit all Colombians.
Gustavo Petro is a former M19 guerrilla, a former senator, and the former mayor of Bogotá. He's vowed to fight worsening poverty and inequality in Colombia by raising taxes on the rich, expanding social programs, as well as access to education and health care. He's called on Colombia to halt new oil extraction and to move away from an economy long dependent on fossil fuel. Petro has also said his government plans to restore relations with Venezuela and renegotiate a trade deal with the United States to better benefit Colombians. Petro won over 50% of the vote in a runoff, defeating right-wing real estate millionaire Rodolfo Hernández, who received about 47% of the vote. Petro addressed his supporters Sunday night.
Nosotros vamos a desarrollar el capitalismo en Colombia.
We will develop capitalism in Colombia.
No porque lo adoremos,
not because we worship it,
sino porque tenemos primero que superar,
but because we first have to overcome pre-modernity in Colombia,
el feudalismo en Colombia,
feudalism in Colombia, and the new slavery.
Esclavismos, la nueva esclavitud. Tenemos que superar mentalidades.
We must overcome the past mentalities and behaviors linked to that world of slavery.
At his side was Petro's vice president-elect, Francia Márquez Mina, a prominent land and water defender who was born in a small village in the southwestern Cauca region, where she led resistance against illegal gold mining despite ongoing death threats. She won the prestigious Goldman Environmental Prize in 2018, is also a lawyer and a former housekeeper. On Sunday, Francia Márquez Mina took to the stage to thank supporters.
Hermanos y hermanas.
Brothers and sisters, we have made an important step forward. After 214 years, we will have a government that represents the people.
For more, we go to Colombia, where we're joined by two guests. In Bogotá, the capital of Colombia, Simone Bruno is an Italian video journalist, has been there for years. And in the Cauca region, we're joined by Manuel Rosenthal, a Colombian physician, longtime grassroots activist who's been exiled several times for his political activities, is part of the organization Pueblos en Camino, or People on the Path. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Let's begin with Manuel. If you can talk about the significance of this election with Petro as president and with Francia Márquez as vice president-elect from the region where you are in Cauca.
Good morning, Amy and everybody. Good morning, Simone. First, I'd like to convey to everybody the feeling of joy, overwhelming emotion and joy that we've all felt and that we felt on Sunday. Our fear was that the election was going to be stolen. There was every indication for that. There was repression by the armed forces. Everything was against Petro, in spite of the fact that we knew if there was no fraud or not enough fraud, he would win. So the feeling is of enormous relief, huge relief, and there's a party in this country. For the first time, an election can be won by the people, in spite of the machinery. At the same time, the same magnitude of that joy is the magnitude of our concern so that it doesn't become a disillusion. Those two feelings are joined together, so our party is once again a celebration of freedom and a concern that we need to organize and mobilize to make change possible.
And I wanted to ask you, Manuel, in terms of the victory of Gustavo Petro is clearly a major advance in Latin America. However, there's still a problem that his ambitious program may be stalled to some degree by the fact that his coalition does not have a majority in the Colombian Congress. What do you foresee now in terms of the battles between the conservative forces in the Congress contending or opposing his program?
Juan, your question is exactly on the spot. Yes, the big concern is, let's put it broadly, even further, even beyond Congress. The establishment in Colombia runs for corruption, for mafias, for transnational corporate interests, and for an army that supports all this and gains a lot of profit and benefit from this. So there's a new government that has to rule on within this structure. The structure has not changed, the powers have not changed, and they have to rule there. So President-elect Petro has promised three things. He has promised social justice, he has promised environmental justice, and he has promised peace. To promise that and to achieve that within an establishment that is as rotten as the Colombian establishment is really to promise what we all want, but it is to promise too much. That cannot be achieved by a government from a government. And you must remember that Gustavo Petro and Francia Marquez reached the presidency after and because of a massive popular uprising against that establishment of which he becomes the government now. So now he doesn't have a majority in government. I'll just give you an idea. He has 20 members of Senate on his side. He needs 54 to pass any initiative. He can achieve 40 or 44 with alliances. So he would have to ally himself with the far right to achieve anything. Add to that all of the control institutions, the Attorney General, every one of those have been left by the mafia run by Uribe, Duque, and all the narco and transnational corporate and army assassins. All of that has been left in place for the next couple of years, and they're enemies of this government and of the Colombian people. So the concern is exactly that. He promised, and so did Francia, what we want. But the fact is he cannot achieve it. He can't achieve it quickly. So he will have to compromise with those that have led us into this disaster. So the hurdle has been overcome by winning the election, but the main hurdle, the establishment, cannot be changed from the government. It has to be changed from the people, by the people, and government is key to it, but it cannot achieve its promises without peoples organized with an agenda. Do we know this? That's my question.
And I also wanted to ask you about the candidate he defeated, Rodolfo Hernandez, who also was supposedly an anti-establishment candidate, but a right-wing populist, campaigning against corruption. But in the week before the election, a video surfaced from a Colombian magazine, and it got a lot of views, hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube, of Rodolfo Hernandez being on a yacht in Miami last October, a yacht he and his sons a yacht that was financed by Pfizer, by lobbyists for the Pfizer drug company. I'm wondering, did you think that had any impact on some people who were wavering between Gustavo Petro and Rodolfo Hernandez in the vote?
It may have, but what it really did was expose the fact that Rodolfo Hernandez was really the candidate of transnational and national corporate interests. What was discovered was that the yacht, in the yacht were corporate representatives of Pfizer, the transnational pharmaceutical corporation, and that this happened in October 2019. But when Daniel Coronel, the journalist from that journal, Cambio, investigated and checked with Pfizer to see who had funded this yacht and this holiday without providing dates, their response, surprisingly, was that a week before, Pfizer representatives and high officials had met with Rodolfo Hernandez. So a lot of information has been gathered up for the fact that Rodolfo Hernandez was, in fact, the candidate of the wealthiest corporate interest in Colombia and the continent, while lying, stating that he was against this. In fact, he had promised, if he was elected, to declare a state of exception or internal commotion, and that state of exception would allow him to run the country, and that he would create a sort of parallel cabinet run exclusively by corporate interests. So what we had here was Petro and Francia Marquez, or a dictatorship of corporate interests in the country. So I think that played. But I'll tell you what really played out and what the right didn't calculate. The right obtained 10.5 million votes, which is more or less the same as Duque obtained 4 years ago to beat Petro, who had 8.5 million votes 4 years ago. But Petro this time had 11.5 million votes, and we know where they came from. They came from women and they came from youth in this country. The image that we'll never forget here was indigenous peoples from the jungles of the Pacific coast in Colombia coming on the rivers in canoes, 2 days traveling to place their vote. So what happened here was we said enough, the same enough that we said in the popular uprising in 2021. That spirit is what allowed Petro to win. The right thought, was convinced it was going to win. They are shocked to see that 2.5 million people appeared from nowhere, according to their calculations, to say enough. So that's the story.
What was also interesting and may surprise a U.S. audience is that Hernandez conceded defeat immediately, unlike in the United States. But I wanted to go to Bogota, the capital, and go back a few years to 2018, anti-government protesters leading multiple national strikes in Colombia, denouncing the government of the right-wing President Ivan Duque, at one point bringing hundreds of thousands of people into the streets for the largest national strike Colombia had seen in decades. Police responded violently, killing several protesters, including 18-year-old student Dylan Cruz, who was shot in the head by a police projectile. Well, on Sunday, after Gustavo Petro and Marquez declared victory in Colombia's historic presidential election, Dylan Cruz's mother, Jenny Alejandra Medina, joined President-elect Petro and Marquez on the stage, calling for justice in her son's killing.
Buenas noches para todos.
Good night to all. On behalf of my son, Dylan, who is one more victim of this country, on behalf of all the victims of the false positives, Nicolas Neira, Yuri Neira, Diego Felipe Becerra, and on behalf of all those victims of this government and previous ones, I raise my voice on behalf of my son to demand justice, and I welcome you, President, because we all have our hopes in you, in justice. You are the hope of us, the poor, the needy. You are the hope of the black, the white, the rich, the poor. You are the hope. Welcome to Colombia, to our country, President.
So that's Dylan Cruz's mother, Jenny Alejandra Medina, in an unprecedented show of support, standing next to the president-elect, as well as the vice president-elect. Simone Bruno, you were in Bogota. Can you talk about the significance of this and the issue of state violence that Francia Marquez, as well as Petro, must take on immediately?
Sure. Thanks for the invitation, and it's an honor to be here with Manuel. I know since almost 20 years. Yeah, that was one of the most important and moving moments on the night of Sunday when Gustavo Petro won the election. It is the first time ever that somebody like the mother of one of the youth killed during a protest in Colombia. And this happened quite a lot because there was a protest happening in 2019, then there was a pandemic closed down, and the protest came back in 2021, where other 40 kids have been killed, at least 40, by police and ESMAD anti-Motins groups. So it was the first time that a mother had the chance to talk to an audience, to talk to a president, to look in the eyes an elected president and ask for justice for his son. So, as you were saying at the beginning, this is a very historical moment as a leftist won the election in Colombia with the highest number of votes in the history of a presidential election. More than 11 million of votes, as Manuel was saying before. But it is not the first time that a leftist would have won the election in Colombia. Everything started in 2048 when the populist candidate Gaitan was killed, and at that time populism was a historical populism, Perón-style populism. So it was killed, and the violence that we are still living here in Colombia today begin that day in 1948. But back in 1990, three presidential candidates, leftists, were killed, Galán, Jaramillo, and Pizarro. And so the importance of the election of Petro is not at the first time, for the first time, the left would have won the election in Colombia, but that for the first time they didn't kill a leftist candidate, so he won the election. What his program means, if Petro and Francia Marquez will be able to implement it, it will really mean a change, an historical change in the country. Petro is a social Democrat. He wants to transform Colombia in a social democrat way. He wants the healthcare to become public. He wants the public education to improve. And he wants to the richest Colombians, the 4,000 richest Colombians, to pay taxes as the rest of the country does. And he wants the richest companies in the country to also pay taxes, which is not happening at this point. And he will use that money to do two things. As Petro is not, is quite conservative in fiscal matters. So what he would like to do is pay part of the social reforms with those money, but also reduce the deficit, the fiscal deficit in the country. That's what the same thing we saw when he was mayor of the city of Bogota. He implemented a lot of social reforms in the city, but at the same time he reduced the debt of the city, and he had an improve in the rating. The Fitch company improved the rating of the city of Bogota during that time.
Simone, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the importance of this election throughout Latin America. We've seen now a second pink tide developing across the region, following the first one that started in the 1990s. We've had Xiomara Castro in Honduras, Pedro Castillo in Peru, Gabriel Boric in Chile, Luis Arce in Bolivia, and now this historic election in Colombia. How do you see this affecting the politics of the region vis-a-vis the United States?
Well, this is an historical moment, even because Lula could come back to the presidency in Brazil, which is key, of course, to change the politics and the policies of the whole region because of the importance of Brazil in South America. But as you said, this is a second wave in 20 years of the leftist government coming in power in Latin America, and possibly they learn from the good things that have been done by Evo Morales, the good things that have been done by Rafael Correa, for example, or the same Lula in Brazil, and probably they also learn from the mistakes, like, of course, it's the circuit that Venezuela had a lot of problems during the past 20 years. So what might happen and what should really happen is that Latin America, or at least South America to begin with, will try to unify the markets in a similar way to what happened in the European Union. This has been tried for decades in Latin America. This scheme of integration have been going on for decades, and they never succeed because in general they have been politicized. Just think to the latest two, the CAN and the Mercosur have always been considered a right-wing market and a left-wing market. Well, what could happen, what should happen if the region really wants to improve the economics is that they should close to the external markets, especially United States, and they should try to develop internal markets inside South America and trying to produce goodies. One of the main arguments of Petro related to Venezuela is that they need to reopen the border, they need to reestablish the connection and the relation. For example, Venezuela was the second market of goods coming from Colombia till the era of Álvaro Uribe, and that was accounting up to $6 billion per year. And that market was shut down because of ideology during President Uribe era. So probably what might happen now is that finally the South American country and maybe the Latin American country, including Mexico ruled by Manuel López Obrador, or Central America that is changing as well, that will decide to unify and close the markets and decide to grow together.
Well, we want to thank you for being with us, Simone Bruno, video journalist in Bogotá, the capital of Colombia, and Manuel Rosenthal in Cauca, Colombian physician and activist, part of the group People on the Path, Pueblos en Camino. When we come back, we're going to hear from the first leftist president himself, Gustavo Petro, when we interviewed him on Democracy Now! A few years ago, as well as Francia Márquez Mina, Colombia's first black vice president. We'll hear from both of them in their own words on Democracy Now! Stay with us.